Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So, to me, this chapter fulfills so many things that have already happened that we've been saying we're going to cover later, and now we finally are able to.
It feels sad that we've covered these things so often because it won't have the same impact for the people who've been following us for a while, because you know what's coming. And for those of you who are just starting to follow with us, you'll be like, where on earth is this coming from?
Yeah, go back about 15 episodes. It'll only take you 15 hours.
We're sorry, everyone.
No, but really, the fact that you all listen. Well, okay, I have to share this brief story because I got my podcasting start like literally 5 years ago in someone's garage. And that was the studio setup. And it was me with one microphone, and my outlines were absurd, like written word for word. And I was just reading letters, basically. And I remember him telling me, don't write too much. People don't want to listen to that. And here I am with 16 to 40 page outlines with 40 to an hour episodes, 40 minute to an hour episodes. And y'all are listening. Y'all look forward to listening. Like, we have regulars who immediately listen once it posts. So thank you for that. Thank you for not making it true that nobody would listen if we had long episodes, because you have proven that wrong. And we have built such a interesting ministry off of that. So thank you. Anyway.
They're here for Gina.
Back to my 12-page outline, our 12-page outline on Genesis 48 and Jacob blessing Ephraim and Manasseh. I do want to point out our dear friend Albert pronounces Ephraim, or Ephraim.
There are a lot of different pronunciations that we get wrong as English speakers, just because it's not very natural the way that they're pronounced in the original language. Like Isaac is Yitzhak and Joseph is Yosef. Okay, that's easier. Israel is Israel.
I love how they say the angel names, though. I can't say them.
Michael.
Yeah, like it just sounds so much
Say
better.
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. That one's actually fairly close. We say Melchizedek, they say Melchizedek.
Remember with Chet Alarmer? I had such a hard time. I used to call him Cheese Man.
Cheddar Lomer.
Yeah. Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh in Genesis 48. And so I'm going to read some of the scriptures and we'll jump in. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem." This is a lot. And again, we get a little caught up on the first couple of verses, but this is very enriched. There's a lot here. So Joseph finds out that his dad is ill and he comes running. On one hand, I'm like, that's normal for a concerned son, but I wonder a little bit, just based on the later verses in this, if Jacob knew that was one of the only ways to get his son to come and take it seriously. Because we know that Jacob is like, who are these boys in the last chapter?
Yeah, you do get the impression that he hasn't gotten to see much of Joseph And that brings additional depth to what God promises Jacob, where he says, Joseph will close your eyes. It's not really promising that he's going to see a lot of Joseph, but he's saying at the very least your son is going to be there for your final moments. And that adds an additional level of tragedy where, yes, he doesn't really know Ephraim or Manasseh, and yet these are going to be his sons now. And you could see a version of reality, as we've talked about many times, where Joseph was more involved and thus his children would have been more involved. And this would have been less of a bittersweet kind of ending. But it does seem like Joseph has taken his job so seriously that it's taken up all of his time, and the remaining years that he could have had with his father have passed him by.
I think we have an easy time assuming, oh, it's like ancient times, like they rode around on donkeys. How hard could life be? But if you think about what we know of Egypt today, based on archaeology and records, like Egypt, their like census records have their population between 1.5 and 5 million people. And according to the last chapter of the Bible, Joseph interacted with all of the people in different ways to sell them grain and then enslave them. Even if it was a couple 100,000 people because it's a famine, that's incredibly busy work. Like I think about the mega church I used to work for, they would see 5,000 to 10,000 people per Sunday over 3 services. And that for one pastor was incredibly overwhelming just for that short time period. Imagine dealing with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are relying on you for sustenance. I can understand why Joseph would have had a hard time coming around.
And on top of that, if you look at the geography of the location, so Goshen was about 100 miles away from the likely capital, Memphis, of Egypt. So Joseph would definitely be closer to the capital, and his family is on the outskirts. Like 100 miles back then, like that's still like a 2-hour drive now. Back then, that's a day's travel at least. You're not doing that a lot, especially you're going to have to take a long weekend to go visit your family. Not going to happen when you're feeding the entire world at this point.
So whether or not this is trickery, it's debated. But I see it as a possibility, and I like believing that for Jacob because he's gotten the short straw in every other instance. And this is the chapter where I'm doing what I want.
And it stands out, like Joseph is told your father's ill, and like his first response is he's going to grab his 2 sons and go. He's preparing for the blessing. And I know this is the fathers will give their blessings and bestowments when they're coming to the end of their life, but from the text, it can come across presumptuous for sure.
God appears to Jacob in Luz. He's telling this story in the land of Canaan, and he was blessed. Why this story? Of all of the interactions that Jacob had with God, why is he bringing this one up? Because he just a couple of years ago was in Beersheba going into Egypt and interacted with God. Any ideas? I just have the 2 points that I put in there because God spoke to Jacob at Bethel twice. He gave him the covenantal promise in that location. Bethel is Luz. He renamed it Bethel. And in Genesis 28 and Genesis 35, God interacts with him there and makes this promise and then reaffirms this promise. And I also put a note, but I don't think it's related to Bethel, so it can wait.
I think it's in part relevant because this is the same promise that was given to Abraham. It's the promise that was given to Isaac. It's the promise that's given to Jacob. And because it was given to the patriarchs, it's a very important promise to pass on, to remember. And we're going to see some other things that Jacob asks of Joseph. And they're very important because it's meant to be something to help him and his brothers remember. Remember the Lord, remember the promise, remember eventually they will return to their home.
You mean remember his father's house? That one of his kids literally means forget.
Yeah, the irony there, where Joseph literally named one of his kids Forget, and he explains that as, I have forgotten everything, including my father's house. And so Jacob not only incorporates this son into his own family, but he's also asking his son Joseph to remember the promise that was given to him by God, Isaac by God, Abraham by God, because Joseph has not had a very good memory up to this point, except he's remembered some bad things, but he hasn't necessarily remembered all the things he should have.
I do. So one of the things I did in the outline is I pinpointed the promises that are being relayed to Joseph, because there's a lot. I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make you a company of peoples. I will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. This is a lot of promise and covenantal meaning in a very short little speech.
No, I think this coming to Joseph as well. So he is saying God met him. And like with Jacob, the theophanic view of God is gone. Like it ends until Moses. So we don't see God presenting himself before his people again until Moses. So he is reestablishing that covenant that God made with him and his forefathers. So Jacob is with his son, who has seemed to forget this covenantal line. So the covenant is basically restated in Jacob's words here and perpetuated onto Joseph, and now the adoption of his sons, and the covenantal meaning is carried on that way forcefully.
And I think we're seeing an admission from Jacob that Joseph is not his son anymore, because he's adopting his children. Only these two. And he's specifically laying out here, the rest of your children will share in the inheritance of these two sons that are now mine. They will be considered my sons, equal to them for the sake of inheritance. However, these two sons are mine. The rest of your children will be yours. They will carry your name. These will be mine. And he's saying this at the tail end of reminding him of the prophecy that was given to him by God for his family. So he's saying, your family will still share in this. However, unfortunately, you're not it.
It makes me think that Jacob found out Joseph was still alive and had this hope momentarily, like maybe this can be salvaged to be what I am used to from this son. But here, it's almost like he's saying, you died. Like the you that I knew as a boy died when you were sold. And I'm going to allow your firstborn sons to inherit, but covenantally you are void.
And here I think we see the fulfillment of Joseph's second dream. It probably was fulfilled a long time before this, but the idea that he is not counted amongst the stars, all wisdom, all authority, even if you want to assume like the sun and moon are Jacob and his birth mother bowing to him. We see that there is a submission of authority and wisdom to him, and his brothers submit to him, but he is not counted amongst them. He is not amongst the stars. And so his sons need to be adopted, brought in order for him to regain that connection to his father. But he has effectively lost it.
It's also interesting because this statement, I will give the land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. One, Jacob's acknowledging that not even he. So he basically what he's saying is my generation and my son's generation are not inheriting this land. Maybe my grandson generation will. He's lumping his grandsons into this promise because maybe they will inherit it. But so far, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, none of them have inherited it, even though they were promised it. And then also notably is this everlasting possession comment. And Cody had some good thoughts on that. It's definitely evocative of heavenly ideology, but it's heavily contested. So I put the Hebrew, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce if you want to give it a go, but it's from the Torah. And the Torah, traditionally, these words in Hebrew do not typically point beyond earthly possession. Akuziat, something, olam.
So it's an interesting comment because we know that there are multiple points at which the Jews lose possession of this land because they're conquered multiple times. So it's hard to say that the everlasting possession is the land itself. And also, Gina, in our episode on hell, you made the point, and I've come to agree with you pretty much, that the earth itself is going to burn, that the earth in its current form is passing away, heaven and earth shall pass away, and there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth with a new Jerusalem. So the land itself isn't most likely what's being promised here as the everlasting possession.
But if you actually dig on that, the Jewish tradition is extremely opposed to any sort of afterlife discussion. So the rabbinic documents, jubilees, even just the original language, it is strongly argued that all of it is for the literal land of Israel.
And I don't blame them for that. There have been so many conflicts the Jews have fought, and so many times where they have been dispersed throughout all the nations and then brought back. But when we get to the time of Christ, he constantly keeps talking about the kingdom of heaven. He gives parables about the kingdom of heaven and about the inheritance of Gentiles, the promises to them, the promises to Israel, and how Abraham is now our father as well. Like, it's clear that the inheritance being promised here is not simply to the descendants of Jacob. It's an inheritance that will one day be shared amongst the whole earth. And our inheritance isn't this earth. It's the world after. And I think there's a very good reason for why the New Jerusalem is called what it is, the New Jerusalem. That is an eternal inheritance, an eternal home. And C.S. Lewis talks about how there is this longing for a home that we never seem to find. And I do feel like that's reminiscent of the feeling that it seems like Jacob has here. This home that was promised to him that he never seems to get, that his dad never got, that his grandfather never got, always seeming out of reach. And that is the way that we live now. We talked before in one of our previous episodes about how it feels like we're in a kind of spiritual exile in a sense, at the very least in America. The American churches seem to almost be exiled in a sense. And even we as Christians who are getting close to God, there's always a measure of distance, which, Gina, you had a vision at church, which hopefully we'll get into one of these days. But
you have to keep listening if you want to hear it.
Yeah, we can't go into that now. We just can't talk about it now.
You didn't rhyme.
But the point is that it does feel like the land promised for eternity. The land of Israel is supposed to point to that inheritance, but is not the inheritance itself.
I liked the verse in Hebrews 11:13-16. I'll read it really fast and we can pick it apart. So these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. I think the New Testament, which is not acknowledged by Jews as being scripture for most Jews, is very clear. It's not a literal city in Jerusalem that's going to be crushed and rebuilt in end times. I think this is more, it's done. And we're in exile waiting until Jesus comes back again. It's very contested.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. We were talking about this before. The very concept of the Messiah is contested, where they have two different, they have the two different lines of Messiah, and they're like, okay, so like one, there's going to be the one that comes in the clouds with glory, and then there's the other that's, no, he's the one that like comes riding on a donkey into Jerusalem. And they're very double-minded about these things, and they come up with all these explanations for things in the Bible, which are explained fully in the New Testament, and explained very well in the New Testament, and it all makes sense. But they can't say that because then it means that they need to become Christian. And so there's the constant jumping through hoops to try to reinterpret the history of the Bible and the prophecies in it.
And there are some Christian beliefs that mirror this. So like Justin Martyr had a pre-millennial perspective on this. So he believed the promised land would be fulfilled in the actual city. But Origen and Augustine and Aquinas and Calvin all believed that it was heavenly. In fact, Calvin's quote is, "The land is a figure of the heavenly rest to come." If you follow any of those church fathers or a reformer, like, it can't be the literal Jerusalem. To me, eternal possession, everything is dust and ash. You can't take it with you into heaven, but there are eternal rewards.
Your eternal reward.
You see what I did there?
Yes, I did.
I don't know. It's something that I don't feel like is even worth debating because it's so obvious to me and the New Testament confirms it. But if you want to debate me, reach out. I'm down to debate if this is heaven or not. Moving on. Okay. So interesting that the grandfather adopts the grandsons when the father is still alive. And also the father doesn't have to consent.
No, and that's typical of many practices. So the Newsy tablets actually have very paralleled accounts of like grandparents adopting grandchildren and just the adoption process in general and how that was to be taken. And you later on, we'll get into the Reuben-Simeon connection, but if somebody was to adopt, according to the Newsy tablets, the adopted son would actually take precedent even over the bloodline sons because you're elevating them to a position of authority by adopting them. So you have to put them as your firstborn in that sense. So that could be the reason why Reuben and Simeon are picked out there, because they're technically the two firstborns in that sense, and Manasseh and Ephraim will be taking their place. And this parallels other Annie literature out of the time as well.
Like what?
So Maidman translation, the tablet concerning adoption, in Nema has adopted Wulu as his son. As long as Sheminiah lives, Wulu shall care for him. When Shema dies, Wulu shall be his heir like a son of his own body. So there's multiple touch points actually in the Newsy tablets that parallel this. There's explicit adoption language. He is his son, adopted heir equal to natural born sons. And this parallels what we'll read here in a second on just the adoption ritual that is happening here, whether Joseph likes it or not.
When I read this, I was like, whoa, is he comparing these like Egyptian boys to Reuben and Simeon? Is he saying, I'm going to hold them in the same esteem as I hold Reuben and Simeon? And it took me some time to marinate on it. And Cody was really good about helping me understand some of the original language and how the translation makes it a little messy to understand. But at first I was like, whoa, like, why not say that they would be his like Benjamin or somebody that he likes a little bit more? Because Reuben and Simeon, man, they were violent, they were harsh, they were brash, like they made brutal decisions. And I can't imagine being like, yeah, I'm going to lump your boys in with these worst of mine.
The title that they hold, I think, is more evocative of what he's bringing to mind. Kind of like what you were saying, Cody, which is that because they are the firstborns, Jesus is referred to as the firstborn of creation. Again, it's not because he was the first thing created. It's that the title of firstborn is an important one. It means you are the highest, the one with the most authority. And so effectively what he's saying is these two firstborns, you will be as they are in terms of the title of firstborn. And that goes very well with what the Newsy tablets pointed out, just like you said.
Yeah. So we know, spoiler alert, we've gotten to the end of Genesis, right? So the next chapter, Jacob does his blessing for everybody else. And we've talked about it before, but Jacob is very strategic in what he gives each son and what he doesn't give each son. And I do believe that part of why he's bringing up Reuben and Simeon here is to shame them, because in the past he said, I'll deal with you later. And the time has come to pay the piper. And the first step here is basically saying, your first two boys are going to be like my first two boys. And even some scholars argue that they're replacing Reuben and Simeon in the blessing.
And that lines up with the A&E literature too, because they would literally be taking their place, not swapping them out. And through the context of scripture, we know that Reuben and Simeon still are tribes and they have their inheritance, but the birthright or the earthly inheritance would actually go to Ephraim and Manasseh first. And I think, there's decent scholarship and pretty easily biblically traceable reasons to believe that their earthly inheritance in this next chapter that we're going to cover as well is taken away.
And some Jewish scholars have this funky claim that because Jacob didn't love Leah and Rachel was his favorite, that he's just trying to finagle the birthright to be for Rachel's lineage instead of Leah's, and that it had nothing to do with the disputes that took place earlier in Genesis. I would argue that the Bible itself disputes this, so we don't even have to argue it. But I do find it interesting exploring what other cultures believe about these verses.
And that can definitely come in play, but you mentioned, Gina, it's one of those things that Jacob kind of stores in his heart and saves it for later. And we know it's coming at blessing because we've read scripture before, but it is one of those things he savors and holds for later.
And I gotta say, this is the most Jacob way to do this. He holds on to everything. He doesn't say anything for years and years and years. And then literally on his deathbed, okay, now I have something to say.
You think I forgot?
And also, I'm not going to have to live with any of the consequences. You guys sort this out after I'm dead.
Oh, yeah. And they do, because they're like, oh, by the way, Dad said don't hurt us, Joseph.
Joseph, yeah, he totally said that. I believe you. Sure he did.
But I did love, so just reading through some of the other texts about Ephraim and Manasseh in comparison to Reuben and Simeon. So Jubilees and First Chronicles do defend Joseph's sons as being righteous compared to Reuben and Simeon. So even though Ephraim is known as being rebellious, it's still better than Reuben and Simeon.
Yeah, I think it's funny. And some Jewish tradition I get in a sense, because I don't think that's developed fully until Revelation, but this kind of starts the weird tribal lists of Israel that are not the same hardly anywhere. So you have Ephraim and Manasseh being added now. Previous to this, it was Joseph was in his spot and the tribal list was there. Now you have Joseph out of it. Ephraim and Manasseh entered. And in Ezekiel, it talks and has Dan listed first because Dan is popular at that time. Doesn't end that way. You have later lists in Numbers where Levi is removed because they're the priestly line, so they're not getting any of the earthly inheritance. So they're off of the Joshua and the land division lists, so to speak. And then we finish in Revelation, and Dan and Ephraim are removed because of their idolatrous actions. And Joseph is added back in, but we still have Reuben and Simeon in there. So a lot of this doesn't add up if you follow the Jewish tradition into what is completed throughout Scripture. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The interpolation that they have.
Interpolation?
That's a real word.
I got some interpolation.
Sorry, I've never heard that word before.
The word.
Believe it or not.
But it does sound very Southern.
I am a layman. Okay. I wrote this down because I think it would be fun to talk about. I want to think through, can we tie the idea of giving the righteous people the gifts intended for the sinner with Christ in mind in this chapter? Do you see that connection? Does it make sense to you? Because to me, this feels weird with Christ in mind. Do you have any
Expand
thoughts?
on that more. Why is this weird with Christ in mind?
Because Old Testament was really focused on inheritance in tangible ways, but the New Testament is very focused on inheritance in terms of heavenly rewards and building up treasures in heaven, and how the rewards that we reap won't be granted to us in this lifetime more than likely, and we're just guaranteed to suffer and experience persecution and people hating us. And it feels opposite to what Jesus taught, but at the same time it's Christ-like because these are righteous people getting a covenantal promise given to them. So it's confusing to me. I'm like massaging it in my brain and it's not connecting, and I want it to, but I can't make it.
Can you like condense that so it's like one straight question?
I don't know. Like, I don't really know how. I just think it's weird that the good guys are finally winning.
I don't know that it's necessarily the good guys are finally winning.
In the long term, they're not all good guys.
And even short term, Ephraim and Manasseh have barely begun to live their lives at this point. They're not infants so much, but they're still referred to as young men here. And they haven't really done much to prove themselves righteous or unrighteous.
Traditionally, they are like heavily by the Jews and heavily by the early church fathers. They are deemed righteous, and it could be more like age of accountability than it is.
So is Joseph, to be fair.
Yeah.
So I take all the tradition surrounding them and their father with a grain of salt. But from what we're shown biblically, because that's really all we can refer to here, because contextually that's all we have to draw on, they haven't done anything. Now, they are absolutely replacing their brothers, and we can argue about some of the issues that their brothers have had.
The uncles?
Sorry, their brothers as well, because they're being adopted. Yeah.
Yeah, they're above them now.
They're their brother uncles.
The wording is difficult. They're brothers who are also their uncles, and I'm my own grandpa.
That was so perfect.
How are we to continue?
I don't know.
With straight faces. I feel like we should bring up Kentucky and Arkansas.
It's Arkansas.
It is Arkansas.
I think I got too caught up in the tradition, and it made my head hurt.
This is where it takes you back in tradition. And I brought it up in the Ishmael episode, and it seems like why you can't trust Jewish tradition always is because it's always like Jews good, everybody else bad. Like no matter what they do.
Yeah. I think this is more a comment on the sins of Reuben and Simeon and less an endorsement of Ephraim and Manasseh. Because we also see that elsewhere when we finally had the line of the kings of Israel. Solomon's son turns out to be a pretty nasty king, and a man is brought in to replace him who ends up being pretty nasty himself. When he comes in, he's not nasty, not to start with, because he hasn't had any time to do anything. But eventually he becomes a pretty bad king in and of himself, and there's the split, where there's Judah and there's Israel, which eventually becomes Samaria, but that's a long story. The point is that God will often do certain things as condemnation for people. And he doesn't do it with perfect people, never with perfect people. But Saul was replaced by David. David had his own share of issues, but was absolutely righteous, so that would seemingly be a point in the favor of the idea that Ephraim and Manasseh were good. But every other time that God replaces one person with another, it very rarely turns out that they're perfect or righteous. It usually is a comment on the fact that as bad as this person may be, they are not as bad as you are the one I am judging with this action. This guy's bad, you are worse. It's meant to be a humbling thing. And Reuben, for all of the good things that he does, we don't see like a ton of showings of him, but like he tried to save Joseph. He tried to keep him from being killed and would have tried to stop him from being sold into slavery. He seems like a solid guy, but he tried to usurp his father's authority. He was not chosen for that. He was not chosen by God for that. He was not chosen by Jacob for that. And yeah, he deserves to be replaced for that. He's not kicked out of the family, and that's good. But he should lose his inheritance because he tried to steal everything from his father.
So many interesting potential rabbit holes there. Because like that's much better fare than what Judah's sons got when they tried to usurp each other's birthright or shirk responsibility, and the brother carrying on the...
Yeah, why'd God strike them down? But you pull a ham and it's fine.
Again, we don't get to see any redemptive qualities of Judah's children. Maybe there were, but all we get to see of them is the fact that they're selfish and they're awful, and they use this poor woman who keeps losing husbands for their own personal gain. Or they really don't care about her at all. And so From Reuben, we do see that there are some redeeming qualities of him in the story of Joseph. And it's good that we get to see that. It humanizes him more than...
his dad, kill my kids if I screw up. It's so nice.
Sure, but you at least get to see the gesture. Yeah, as rough as that sounds, it's like he's trying to get something done. He's trying to, look, Dad, we're all going to die. If your son dies, you can take my sons in replacement. And there's something very Middle Eastern about that kind of gesture. And it's not that it's right, because Judah's the one who does what's right. He says, I take responsibility, do it to me. Hold me responsible. But Reuben tries. And that's the thing. He never really is successful with any of the things he tries. He tries to do the right thing with his dad, and it doesn't work. He tries to do the right thing with his brothers and not get Joseph sold off. It doesn't work. And so he loses his inheritance. It feels like a proper punishment for the Reuben we see. Where, yes, he deserves to be punished, and he is punished, but he's not rejected forever. There's a path to redemption.
Gracious.
Yes, it is.
So, any other thoughts on this whole word salad explanation that I was seeking that ended up just going into tradition and how we rely heavily on it and it is unreliable at times?
It's easy to point to the Jewish tradition and say it's just off the mark here.
Different religion.
Yeah, different religion, easy to do, not rooted in the Bible. And yet, it's hard to be too harsh on them for this because, one, there actually has been value to Jewish tradition as we found. They occasionally do hit pretty solidly on things that we miss. But two, we have our own personal traditions. A lot of our analysis on Joseph and the time we've spent here has been on the Christian tradition that we have of Joseph, and how it also doesn't seem to be rooted in the text either. I don't think we can be too harsh on the tradition or too harsh on you, Gina, for looking at the tradition and being like, there's something here.
But it's like tug of war. On one end, you have a whole bunch of early church fathers that are like heaven. And then on the other end, you have the Jewish tradition that's like earth. And then with inheritance, and the reasons for this adoption, all of it is pulling and there's so much tension. And it makes it really hard for me as just an average person to go through this and make sense of it. If I were to read this at face value, just for the very first time, where is it? So verse 5, I would assume that he's comparing Ephraim and Manasseh to Reuben and Simeon. And then verse 6, and the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. So to me, that's saying whatever kids Joseph has after this adoption belong to him and are his responsibility. And it's ambiguous about who's going to inherit what with those children. Like it's confusing. It's messy. Like the English translation is not excellent here. It's very ambiguous. And I struggled a lot with this, just picking it apart and trying to make sense of it. And Cody and I spent the most time on the outline here.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is this is a bad translation rendering. Like to me, I read that.
Wait, the Bible has a bad translation rendering?
Yes, absolutely.
Mules in the desert.
It's not perfect.
No,
Hot springs.
Hot springs. Yeah. So to me, I read that like verse 6, and your children that you fathered after them shall be yours. To me, that is past tense. He's already had more children in the English ESV, but that is not what the Hebrew says at all.
I remember you talking about it, and it was if.
Yeah. So it's what's called the perfect form. So this is like future tense. Like in the Hebrew, this is pointing to the future, not the past tense or already, like the plain ESV reading to me is. This is any children you father. It should be father instead of fathered. Or like a more like interpretive translation is, if you father any more children, they stay under your line. I am only adopting the first two. Like that would be more a clean, plain understanding of it, and that's more interpretive of the text instead of word for word. But even the ESV shouldn't be using a past tense there. I don't understand why they are using the past tense there, because I read that as the children that are already in existence that you have, that you fathered after Ephraim and Manasseh, will just inherit after those lines, not of their own.
And it's funny you guys say that you got the impression that the opposite is what the Bible was saying, that Joseph already had kids and so they were included in. Because I read some commentaries in preparation for this, and that's what the commentaries were saying, which doesn't make sense. Because I'm with you guys. It seems pretty clear to me from the actual text. It's saying when you have more kids, or if you have more kids, they will share in the inheritance, but they will be yours. So they get whatever it is they're going to get, but they're not my children. Only these two are. That makes an infinite amount more sense than saying all of your kids existing, they're yours, but like these two, they're mine.
It's confusing. And here's the thing. There's no single article or commentary that is going to match another.
No.
For
copyright purposes.
But even just the little nuanced pieces of, do Joseph's future children not inherit anything because they're considered Joseph's? Or are they included in this family? Like you're not going to find a lot of agreement on what all of this means.
So like the rest of the text, I've been struggling with this Joseph narrative because it is so ambiguous, and that is not what is conveyed when you're going through your vacation Bible school. And even today when pastors teach on this, is how ambiguous this text is, because it raises so many questions. So like, again, you read that this is future children, or that the children you fathered after, those are nowhere mentioned. If there is more children, they're nowhere mentioned in any line of Joseph at all. So Ephraim and Manasseh are the only ones listed for Joseph's children. So that's one notch of it being weird in the text. And then we have no context of Ephraim and Manasseh at all. Are they fully adopted in covenantally? And this took me on a weird rabbit hole into circumcision. So did Joseph's kids have to get circumcised? It never talks about that, and looked at what that meant for proselytes, those converting in. So anybody who is not of Jewish descent was a proselyte if they fully converted to Judaism. That meant you took on Yahweh as your God, you practiced Torah, you practiced the full law, and you were circumcised. That meant you inherited all of the blessing. You became an Israelite at that point. You were fully adopted into Israel. That wasn't, you could only go into the outer court. You were a full Israelite at that point, partaking in the full covenant blessing. You just didn't have a tribe. So the land inheritance, the earthly inheritance, you didn't get. But you don't have any of that on Ephraim or Manasseh at all in what it took. And it apparently was very common that Egyptians circumcised themselves as well, especially for the priestly lines and the royalty lines. So they did it for cleanliness and things like that, but they could have already been circumcised. And you're like, okay, how is that a covenantal sign for all of Israel when a lot of the A&E, when we read these texts, it seems like a lot of A&E is circumcised. So how is that a depicting fact? Gina, you were like, oh, I thought that was a pretty telling fact, is like all of the Hebrews were circumcised. So you knew they were Hebrew because they were circumcised. But it seems like a lot of A&E cultures practice circumcision to some extent. So that's not even an identifying factor.
We were just at a museum looking at ancient Egyptian artifacts, and there were several different stations in this museum showing ancient Egyptian statues of gods that had genitalia showing. And one of the things that they pointed out was how it was very rare to see these gods depicted as circumcised because it was taboo. But then you go and read the actual history and it's not. It's actually very important to them for cleanliness and hygiene, not for religious reasons. So there's a lot of conflicting information floating around that people are just pasting places and people are taking it as gospel, but historically it's not factual.
Yeah, this text, the Joseph story, is so much more ambiguous than anybody has given it credit for.
We're told basically what we need to know. We're told Ephraim and Manasseh are brought in as two half tribes. Joseph is not one of the tribes. He is counted later in different lists. But effectively, going forward, as included in the history, there is not a tribe of Joseph that is talked about going out and doing things. It's Ephraim and Manasseh that are talked about as the tribes that go out and do things and are considered half tribes. So this is basically cementing the fact Joseph is not included amongst his brothers. Jacob doesn't want that to be the case going forward, so he brings in his sons to be in his place as the 12th tribe. But he's acknowledging, basically, as far as I can tell, very reluctantly and sadly, but acknowledging on his deathbed, his son isn't his.
I would agree.
But you're right, Cody. There are a lot of additional details that are ambiguous. I've often wondered, okay, so does that mean that immediately these two boys went off to live in Goshen and became shepherds and endured all the same persecution and slavery as the rest of the brothers do as their family continues to grow? Or did they leave as some of the Egyptians did, joining with the Hebrews as they did their exodus out? And they were the two tribes, so they're counted amongst them. I don't know. I'm sure there's answers to those questions, but I'm not aware of them. Maybe we'll get that when we go through Exodus.
I did you guys a favor, and I did more genealogy.
Yay!
Listen, if you don't love the genealogies yet, you're gonna. Do you understand me? Okay, good. So I intentionally skipped Joseph's lineage when I did the full tribal outline a couple of chapters back. And it was on purpose. And there were probably some people like, wait, why did you just so like casually skip over that? It's because I didn't have time. Just kidding. It's because I was waiting for now. And so we are going to talk about the genealogy of Manasseh and Ephraim to prove their faithfulness or their unfaithfulness. It remains to be seen. And Manasseh, we remember his name means to forget. Manasseh is the firstborn. So Manasseh, his line has Gideon from Judges 6-8, who was the faithful deliverer honored in Hebrews 11. There is a clan called Machir, and they are named in Numbers 32 and Deuteronomy 3. They are known for being courageous. They are from the line of Manasseh. There are the sons of Manasseh, depicted as strong, loyal, and fearless. And then in 2 Chronicles 30:1-11, people from Manasseh's tribe repent and return to Hezekiah's Passover. So there is a time of forgetfulness for this tribe, maybe even more than one time, but ultimately they return and they are thought of as repentant Gentiles. Interesting. So then we have Ephraim. What does Ephraim's name mean again?
Fruitful, fertile, or productive.
Oh, he's productive, all right. So Ephraim becomes a symbolic name for all 10 northern tribes, according to Isaiah 7, Hosea 4-14, and Psalm 78. Now, Joshua is from this line. He's faithful, right? Mostly. But Hosea and Isaiah are both extremely critical. So Hosea accuses the tribe of Ephraim of joining to idols, leaving multiplied altars for sinning, feeding on the wind, and Ephraim's glory shall fly away like a bird. And then Isaiah 7 and 9 are, I would say, even more harsh because they call out direct rebellious behavior and also character flaws like pride and arrogance. Traditionally viewed as rebellious and arrogant by both Jewish and early church fathers. And they're also known as the lost tribes. And there's some weird messianic stuff we can talk about if you want, but we already did.
Do you want to talk about dual typology here, like perfectly embodying what we have been talking about with Joseph? Like you have this arrogant, prideful line of Ephraim that is deemed the firstborn by Jacob. Maybe Jacob saying this is Joseph's leading trait. That is my own interpretation there. Then you have Manasseh, the good, the faithful, the
forgetful. He doesn't live up to his name.
No, like he doesn't. But this is the split personality that we've been talking about in Joseph, embodied in the tribes of Israel that are his inheritance.
It does really feel like his two qualities split amongst his two sons. And I think it is incredibly interesting that their histories play out completely differently from the way you would think they would. You would think that the oldest that was passed over in favor of the youngest that got the blessing, he would be resentful. He would forget because that's his name after all. And so that clan would forget. That clan would be the rebellious one. That clan would be the one to go on to do a whole bunch of awful things and completely cast God aside. And you'd think, Ephraim, that's fruitful. Yeah, he is fruitful if he is basically a whole bunch of other tribes are included under this kind of umbrella of Ephraim. And so there's definitely a fruitfulness, definitely a sense of the eldest, the firstborn, the responsibility and the authority that entails under that idea that these other tribes came up underneath it. And yet, fascinatingly, the one that's passed over seems to be the one with his stuff together. That though he seems to go through periods where he forgets, eventually he comes back, which is the story of Israel itself. That whatever his faults, whatever the faults of the people, they come back. Just as Joseph remembers, even though he tries to forget, Manasseh, though it forgets for a period, as all Israel does, it finds its honor, it finds its purpose, it remembers after forgetting.
I loved that term, repentant Gentiles, because this is the OT, baby. We're not there yet, and yet this is what we see.
Gina, you don't get it. Like, it's only Israel. Only Israel follow God.
And yet you have half tribes.
You have half tribes. This is where Jewish tradition, hard for me in some senses, because historically these people are not of the bloodline. So like Egyptian priestess wife of Joseph's, these are half assimilated at the least. I'd argue fully assimilated through Joseph, but are adopted. That adoption language is very frequent throughout the Bible and New Testament especially. But even today, I think there's a lot of Christians talking about like the common theme of the aliens or illegal aliens and stuff comes up a lot, and how we should treat those. And they try to use scripture quite often against that and talk about how the aliens are supposed to be treated like the Israelites in the country, but fail to realize that those aliens living in the country also had to adopt all of the practices of Israel or were stoned to death.
There is the talk in the New Testament about our adoption into sonship, which I think is beautiful in this instance because it shows very clearly that these sons are every bit as much the children of Israel as the other sons are who were born into it. And there's the talk about the grafting in of the vines. And just as easily as I'm trying to remember the exact phraseology there, but it talks about how it is very easy for the original vines to be grafted back on, and the wild vines can be grafted on as well, but they can be taken off. And that's an important thing to remember, and that's what we see. The breaking off, the reunion, the faithfulness, the non-faithfulness. We see a lot of the New Testament playing out in these two tribes adopted into sonship.
I don't know. I can just hear this daddy pastor sermon in my head of you can have parents that are still alive, but God will make sure you're adopted. Like all this beautiful, promising language that ends up being really disappointing when you realize the full extent of adoption and how complicated and hard it was, and how like faithfulness and allegiance is the key to adoption. Do you know what I mean?
No, it is. Like that is, like I mentioned the proselytes before, like they had to fully assimilate into Israel. And part of that was obeying Torah, obeying law. The action is there.
You can waste away in the Father's arms. We'll talk about that later. I don't have time right now.
There's just no time. You can't drop stuff like that on people, Gina, and not explain it.
No, use your imagination.
You teased me with it. It was awful.
Eternal hugging of the Savior and nothing else. That sounds like a full life, right?
No, it's the constant infantilization of biblical characters that we try to do. And we try to envision ourselves like that too. Like how many people like, and I'm guilty of this too. How many people hear the Abba Father and think of the 40-year-old son with the 60-year-old dad, like that relationship? Most people think of the toddler father relationship where you're sitting in their lap and you're having this good hugging time instead of this. One of my favorite moments with my grandpa was we were just talking one day, and
Is this as an adult or a child?
as an adult. So we were just talking one day and we hadn't seen each other. I moved away from Kansas when I was 18 or 20. Hadn't been really around my family too much. And since then, it's probably, I would go back once or twice a year. But anyway, so I'm sitting there talking with my grandpa, and I always had this view of putting him on, not a pedestal, but like this class variance. Like he's above me, he is my superior in a respectful way. And we were just sitting there, and he, probably unbeknownst to him, just said, "I love you, brother." He called me brother. He made me an equal. And that meant a lot to me as someone who helped and had a hand in raising me a great deal. And I looked up to him as a father figure, and he leveled the playing field and had this real conversation with me where it wasn't like I'm just sitting in his lap, or I still go to him for advice, but it's different. Like the relationship has matured, and I'm not saying we're going to be the same or equal levels with Christ, but relationships develop and they don't always look the same. And probably complete run on there, but I hope you get the idea of what I'm trying to say is it doesn't always stay in this infantile view of your relationship with Christ. Like you have to get to and mature in your relationship with Christ where you are that 40-year-old having adult conversations, adult relationships with your heavenly Father as well, not just him holding you and coddling you and, this breastfeeding idea.
It reminds me of our teenager. Like our 5-year-old will come and be like, "Uppies, I want to sit on your lap." And we joke because she'll uncross our legs and like climb on our lap and be like, "You're my chair, you're welcome." And then our oldest, who's almost 15, will come up and try to sit on my lap, and it's, "You're breaking my legs." "You're too big. You don't fit anymore." And I wish that you fit. I loved the years that you did. And I'll always try to embrace you however I can. But the reality is you're as big as I am now. Like you're grown. You have to sit next to me instead of on top of me.
There's a kind of love you can only express through maturity. I didn't know my dad very well growing up. I loved him, but he spent a lot of time working because he had to. On top of having 6 kids that he needed to provide for, he also had a newspaper that he was running, and he was constantly going around the state because he was president of the WNA. So didn't have a lot of time for me, and the time that we had was precious, and he did the best that he could. But when I got old enough, I was in college, I started working with him. And because I had my head in the clouds for a long time in my life, I was a very naive kid and a very naive young adult. I was basically hopeless. I remember when I was going to be working with him as an industrial electrician, I thought I had a toolkit. I really thought I had a toolkit. It was this pathetic little small tool bag that had plastic screwdriver in it. It's got like a plastic handle on it, and it had some swappable bits. And I had a little adjustable monkey wrench in there. He saw it and he laughed. He's like, "You're not going to work with that. Throw that away."
It's like when you met me and you saw the toolkit my dad had made for me and it was pink.
That's adorable.
It was adorable.
You were laughing.
There's not a channel locks in there, not a lineman in there, no side cutters, no nothing. But as I developed and I spent a few years working with him, there was a point, I don't even remember where, but there was a point where I stopped being a kid he needed to teach and became a peer he could rely on. He could send me off to do tasks and I would do them. And around that same time, I was spiritually developing as well into someone who he could have serious, genuine conversations with. I wasn't a little boy anymore that he needed to give instruction to. I was a peer who could give him something back. And that isn't to say we'll ever be able to give back to Christ what he gives to us. And in truth, I'll never be able to repay my dad or my mom for what they've given me because they gave me life, on top of the beautiful relationships I've been able to cultivate with both of them. But there is something we give back to Christ when we reach spiritual maturity. There's a reason why Paul stresses the need for becoming mature, of progressing from the milk to the solid food, not just in the learning, but he talks about the practices. At some point, you have to move beyond the elemental teachings, even the laying on of hands, which is something that we all see in the modern church. A point where you reach the spiritual maturity where it's the deeper things you yearn for and you want to explore. And you do that with your Father, and he can explain things to you that only you will know. He will tell you things just for you, that you will try so hard to tell other people, and they will look at you with that blank expression. Okay, yeah, that's nice. And you'll be, no, you don't understand. And we've had those conversations here, both with Gina and with Cody and with me. All of us have felt things. We're like, no, you don't get it. This is so good.
The genealogy.
We see the beauty in it because God is able to show that to us. But you need some measure of maturity. You can't be the child forever. And that sucks because growing up is hard.
I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. They're holding on to that too, huh?
It's hard. It's not something that we give back to God, but it's something that we get to actively do. Like, we talk about the divine council and God incorporating angelic beings into his idea of dominion over the earth and then our dominion over the earth. But like, it is, like, you want a purpose of life. You want what you were put on this earth for, is like God is giving you purpose in his kingdom to go out and do. And that is not necessarily giving back to God something that he needs or can't.
You can't earn your salvation.
No, but it's a way to participate, kind of like you mentioned, Ben, like your dad could trust you to go out and do tasks. Like God gets to that point with us. There's this spiritual immaturity, you're on the milk. You shouldn't be going out and teaching people at that point because you can cause a lot of damage if you don't know what you're talking about. And you try to talk from a confident standpoint. But there's a point where you mature enough to go out and start taking care of some of those tasks that God puts you on. And he's going to.
And it's not going to be like, hey, Cody, go read Revelation. It's going to be like, hey, Cody, here's some words you don't understand yet. Find someone to translate them. Like, the ways that God has spoken to us are not clear. He gave me 2 words once. For 2 years, all I had were 2 words.
They're starting to make sense.
They're starting now to make sense. Okay, thanks for that. That's not easy. That's like saying solve a squared times b squared. And what does it equal? You have no numbers. So how do you solve it?
It's like handing you a picture of Aretha Franklin and a Sharpie. You say, now hurry up. Do I draw a mustache on her? Do I sign Aretha Franklin on the picture? I don't understand.
Like, the assignment is never obvious.
No, but that's part of wandering in the wilderness. Like, it's not, we're in exile, but it's also a time to learn and develop and be challenged. Like,
Don't make me read another poem about the desert. The desert is such a blessed place. Like, when you really embrace it, you will hate it there. But once you look up and stop looking at your feet, you'll actually find that it's really blessed. And you'll find that there are people with you. And you're not actually alone in your desert. You just tell yourself you are, because sometimes that's easier than being vulnerable and asking for help. But you have an assignment. You're not a baby anymore. And the reason that you feel convicted and the reason why you haven't shut us off by now, if you're still here, is because you need help maybe with that grown-up assignment. And that's why we are here. And that is why your peers at your church and in your groups are with you. It's why you have people who have led you to Christ, and you need to rely on them and stop asking to be coddled and snuggled, because you won't be. Or I guess you could choose to be, but you will waste away. And what a terrible waste of God's breath. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.